Video 2 is about how to construct your presentations. That's right, how to put them together. Let's talk a little bit about why to learn to do this well. First of all, let's not use notes. There are times when using notes or cue cards might be appropriate, but frankly, they're not very often those times. Really, aren't you most interested when a speaker can just take the stage and speak from their heart and share from the heart without glancing down at paper all the time? I think so. And so what we want to do is learn to construct talks that allow us to flow our presentations from memory easily so that we don't have to worry about remembering exactly which word goes in which place. The second thing is that we want our talks to be flexible. Here's what I mean by flexible. If you are doing public presentations, quite often you might not be the organizer of the event that you're speaking at. In other words, it's possible that the organizer comes to you one day and says, you remember that 45-minute talk you're about to do? Well, we need you to do it in 30 minutes. Here's the reaction of most speakers, and I mean some of the most seasoned professional speakers that I know. Here's the reaction. What? What do you mean I have to change it? I've already rehearsed it this way. This is how I remember it. My slides will all be messed up. You can't cut my talk by 15 minutes. I swear they have tantrums. There's only one acceptable answer. If your producer or if the promoter of the event asks you to cut 15 minutes off your talk, and that acceptable answer is no problem. If you've learned to construct your talks in an incredibly organized way, which I'm about to show you, you will be able to shave 15 minutes off your talk without giving it a second thought. And as a result, the producer is going to like working with you. I'm telling you, it's absolutely one of the most powerful things you could learn. I'm going to give you a real life example. Some years ago, I was doing a presentation at a conference in Manchester, England. When I got there, I was prepared to do a 45-minute presentation. And I was preparing for my presentation. I had about maybe, 15 or 20 minutes before I was due to be on stage. And then suddenly the producer came up to me and said, hang on. We need you to take 15 minutes off your presentation. You can only be on for 30 minutes. And so I said, no problem. And the producer at that point looked back at me confused, like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Because every time they had ever asked a speaker to cut time from their talk, this speaker had complained or protested. And suddenly they heard me saying, no problem. And he looks at me and he says, actually, she looks at me and said, really? No problem? I said, absolutely, no problem. I have a few slides to delete, but otherwise it's going to be no problem. She's like, great, excellent. So then as I went to work on my slides, I suddenly had her come back up to me again. She goes, Eric, I noticed you're using a Mac. I said, that's right. She goes, the next presenter, his Mac died and he can't use his slides and he's in a total panic. He's got the slides on a thumb drive. Can we use your Mac for the presentation? And so what did I say? Bear this in mind that I needed to make some changes to my slideshow because they just cut 15 minutes out of my talk. What would most people say in this place? I think they'd protest. I think they might even complain. Instead, all I said was, no problem. I don't need my slides for my presentation because I know how to construct my talks and use slides only as an accent, not as a crutch. I didn't say those things, but that was the energy. And I handed the computer over. She goes, really? You don't need your slides for your presentation? I said, absolutely not. No problem. And so I went about preparing for my talk without my slides, my 30-minute presentation. The time came. I took the stage. I walked up onto the stage. I gave my presentation. And I was getting a 15-minute warning, and then I got a 10-minute warning, and then I got a 5-minute warning. That 5-minute warning was not the first 5-minute warning I would receive that day, because about 3 minutes later, I got another 5-minute warning. And then I got another 5-minute warning, and then I kid you not, I got a 15-minute warning. And then I got a 30-minute warning. All told, I was on stage for 90 minutes. 90 minutes from a 30-minute scheduled talk. And here's the beauty. The audience never knew. They couldn't tell, they didn't know, because the way I'm about to show you to construct talks will make them extremely time flexible so that when somebody tells you you have to stop 10 minutes early or go 10 minutes long, the answer you can give them is, no problem, all good, ready to go. So are you ready to learn? We're going to use something that we call SpeechMaps. SpeechMaps. Some of you may be familiar with mind mapping, or if you've worked with Brian Main, you may have seen goal mapping. Or if you've worked with me in a business environment, you will have heard of role mapping. So now we're going to talk about speech maps. Speech maps are based on the idea that linear memory will simply get you in trouble on stage. Here's what I mean by this. If your talk is memorized in a linear fashion, that is that point A leads to point B, leads to point C, leads to point D, then the challenge with that is that if you have to remove one of those points, you may have a hard time finding where you were in the whole conversation. Go to any large group of people and just immediately say, what comes after G? Well, then they're going to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, H. H comes after G because people have a linear memory of the alphabet. What we want to do is move toward having a map memory of our presentation rather than a linear memory. Think of it this way. If we were to hire Aerosmith to come and do a concert for us right now, you and me, let's do it. We'll put it together. Big concert, Aerosmith. They're going to come and play for my birthday in March. And you know what? It's going to be so cool. We're going to get them to play for an hour. Now, imagine that we did this. We've booked them and they're on their way. So exciting. Then we say to them, you know what, guys? There's been a little double booking. We've got another act coming in. It turns out the Rolling Stones are coming as well. And you need to cut half an hour out of your set. Would that be possible? What do you think they would say? No problem. No problem at all, because they operate from a perspective of sets. Let me say it one more way. Do you think that they would have to rehearse to do the 1 hour concert for my birthday at all? Absolutely not. They would not have to rehearse because they are not building the concert. They're assembling a set from pre-rehearsed content or songs. In our case, we'll be using stories. We'll be constructing our talk from a series of stories and points that we would like to make. In fact, in part 3, I'm going to show you some really cool ways to catalog your stories and develop a database of really exciting stories that you can always use to create a talk on a moment's notice whenever you need to. For now, though, imagine that you had a series of stories that you knew very well. And so when somebody asked you to put a talk together, you did it just like Aerosmith or the Rolling Stones would. You say, well, it's a 1 hour presentation, so I'll put this 10-minute story here, I'll put this 10-minute story there, and I'll put this 15-minute story there, and I've got enough filler between them that that'll last an hour. Now, if somebody comes along and says, hey, you got to cut that down by half an hour, you look at which stories you can remove or which stories you can tell in a shorter form, making your talk extremely flexible. By the way, if we then went back to Aerosmith and said, Mick and the boys canceled on us, can you guys play for an extra hour? Well, we might have to negotiate about payment a little, but at the end of the day, they'd add that extra hour on without difficulty at all, because they would simply be adding stuff to the map rather than having to add something to some predetermined linear presentation. So the way we're going to do this is basically by creating a speech map. I'm going to put one up on the screen for you right now. So if you look in the middle of the map, what you'll find is the topic. Then the map works in a clockwise fashion. So at the top right-hand side, you'll see where the talk begins. It begins with something we call the F15, something that I'll be showing you if you ever come to one of our live workshops. It's an extremely powerful way to start any presentation so that you absolutely know that you're on track. We call it the F15 because, you know, an F-15 fighter plane uses a massive amount of its fuel just for the liftoff. In fact, for a short flight, it can use as much fuel for the liftoff as it does for the whole flight. And so what we do with our F-15 is put as much effort into that first 15% of a presentation as we do the balance. So you see that there's an F-15 up in that top corner. Then as we move clockwise around, you can see that we're going to tell a story and make a point. Then we're going to tell another story and make a point. We're going to tell another story and make a point. And then we're going to finish with a final story and a final point. And you notice that each of these stories has a long and a short time that I can tell them in. This one's 8 to 12 minutes. This one's 10 to 15 minutes. And so on. This means that if you come along and ask me to cut my story or cut my talk down, I can either pick shorter versions of these stories, or I could eliminate one story entirely. And I could do that in my mind in a heartbeat without having to change any notes, without even really having to give it much consideration at all. In fact, I could do it on the stage in a moment's notice, and so can you. In fact, if you would like a template of a story map, just write to me on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll make sure we get one out to you. We'll get you a template of a story map. It's really easy. And then all you have to do is fill in the blanks and you'll have your story ready to go. Here's the other reason too. Once you create a story map, you just look at it. You look at it and you remember it visually. And when you remember it visually, you're able to look up and say, yes, I know that from here I go to here to go to here. Yes, and then I have this point to make and this story to tell. And it's a really nice way to remember your maps. I've been using these for years. In fact, for really major presentations, I will create a large poster-sized map with actual pictures and stuff on it. For example, some of you will have seen me talk about WildFit. WildFit is a nutrition company that I founded years ago, and I love to speak about it. So if I was doing a WildFit conversation, you would see the map, and there'd be a picture of an elephant over here, and a picture of cheetah over here, and a picture of Bushman over here, and they actually put the pictures right on the map. And then I'll take that map and tape it down to the stage, so that as I'm speaking to the audience, if I need to refer to my map, I can just look down at my feet, and it's boom, it's right there. In fact, here's what's really cool. The very first time that I got invited to present at one of Tony Robbins' business mastery seminars, I was so excited and I wanted to make sure I got it right. So I made these incredible maps, put them on poster boards, and got ready for my slot. I walked up on the stage during the break and I went to tape them down on the stage. And you know what I had to do? I had to find space because guess what? Tony's maps were on the stage. This is an incredible, incredible way to deliver compelling talks, remember where you're going at all times, and be able to modify whenever you need to. So to recap, we use stories. And we're going to talk about stories in the next part, how to build them, how to construct them, and how to keep track of them. Then once we've talked about stories, or once you've got some stories, you put them into a map. You put them into a map so that you are telling a story and making a point, telling a story and making a point, because you are now rather more building a set than a speech, which will allow you the flexibility of telling shorter or longer versions of the story, or even deleting or adding stories as you need to change the length of your talk on the fly. This will make you so professional. By the way, years later, I was on tour in England, and I had a gap in the middle of my tour, and my agent contacted the conference organizer from Manchester. The Manchester incident had been 6 or 7 years previously. And they contacted him and said, look, Eric's on tour in England. If you guys have any events coming up, I've got a couple of holes in the calendar. We could get Eric to come up to Manchester and do an event with you. They wrote back immediately and said, wow, we've got the perfect conference, but it doesn't look like it matches up with Eric's calendar. And true to form, it didn't. Their conference overlapped exactly with events I was already doing in London. Then, when we informed them that I couldn't make it, the conference organizer contacted my agent and said, we've just spoken with our team and we've decided we will add on an extra event the next day, especially for Eric. Why do you suppose they did that? We can get into all kinds of conversations about whether I have demand in that market, whether the people really like me and all that sort of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, here's why they really did it. They did it because the producer really enjoyed working with me. I'll tell you something that's really interesting. If you want to stir a bit of an online controversy, you go online to LinkedIn and log on to any of the professional speaker forums and ask this question. Who is your customer, that is? The audience or the producer of the event? And you will get people like fighting tooth and nail over this question. And I want to tell you the answer is absolutely clear, and don't let anyone tell you differently. The producer is your customer. Until the customers are actually buying products from you, if they're buying a seminar from you that you're producing or a talk from you that you're producing, then they're your customer. If you are speaking on someone else's stage, then the producer is your customer. And in the case of Manchester, I had taken such good care of the producer that the producer wanted me to come back. Remember, this doesn't mean that I disregard the audience. It means that I serve the audience through the lens of my actual customer, which is the producer. This, by the way, will end the temptation to run long in your desire to serve the audience. You never want to run long in your desire to serve the audience when the producer is giving you a time slot. You can do that. The audience might love you for it, but there's two problems. One, the audience will probably buy less stuff from you if you're selling a book or a program or something because you've given them so much. If you increase the supply, you reduce the demand. And the second problem it'll create is that the producer won't want to work with you again because you're unpredictable. You running over by 5 or 6 or 7 minutes might have an impact upon their entire day that you can't even begin to anticipate. The producer is your customer. When you construct a talk, you build a set. The set is nonlinear. Story, point, all the way around the dial. And if you'd like a template of a speech map, just hit me up on Twitter or Facebook and we'll get one out to you. Are you ready for part 3?